Hey everybody, and welcome. In today's video, we are going to take a look at materials inside Unreal Engine 4. Now, this video is meant for somebody who has never worked with UE4, but is coming from 3ds Max background. So I will try to make a parallel between the two softwares and how we can learn materials inside Unreal Engine if we've worked with Max. So the first thing that you can see that in my scene over here I have is very simple two boxes here, and I have this asset here. Now this preview mesh, you can find it if you create a new project in the starter content. If you go down to shapes, you're gonna, or not shapes, but if you go down to props, you're gonna find it here, SM material preview mesh. SM being the static mesh. So if you drag that thing in the scene, this is basically what you're gonna have. So if you want to follow along with me, feel free and just drag out one preview mesh in your scene. Now, the first thing that happens is when you select your mesh is if you go over to the right side and you scroll downwards a bit where it says materials. What you're going to notice is that we have here two materials, so element 0 and element 1. Those are for the different IDs that were given to this static mesh, and since there are two of them, we have one of them for the sphere and one for the color of the hue here. So that means if we want to change anything on this asset, we have two materials that we need to create. But for now, I'm going to go back to content. And here I want to create a new material and see how we can make that parallel between Unreal Engine and 3ds Max. The first thing would be to actually create the material. And what I'm going to do here is I actually have created a folder in here. The way to do it is right click here and just go and create a new folder. I've called mine assets. And inside there is nothing here. So I want to create a new material. The way to create a new material inside Unreal Engine is very easy. All you have to do is go inside your content browser in one of the folders that you want to create the material, right click, and from here choose create basic asset material, or if you want, you can come over here where it says add new, and from here choose the material. For now, I'm going to right click and create a material. Now, naming your material, it's a good idea to have a naming convention. For materials, for example, you would put M underscore and then name the material to whatever you want to use it. For me, I'm going to call this master material and enter. Another thing that you would probably get to know is that when you're working with Unreal and you're naming stuff, you can't really place or put spaces in your names. Instead, you have to use an underscore. All right, so we have this master material created. So if I double click on it, this is what happens. We are greeted with a new window in which we have a lot of different options. But before we go in and dive in deeper, let's see what this thing is similar to. We said that we were going to make a parallel between this and 3ds Max. So if I go ahead and open 3ds Max here, and I open my material editor by pressing M, this is the default slate material editor. What you have here is basically you have the view. You have a lot of different materials in here. You can have your standard or V-Ray or pretty much anything that you might be using. And then you have a lot of different maps on the side. And on the right side, you have all of the options that you can change on the selected material. So this is fine for 3ds Max, because if we select, let's say, for example, a standard material, on the side we have the diffuse, the specular, the ambient, or if we choose V-Ray material, again, by clicking it, we have all of the options here that we can change and get the material that we want to. But other than that, this is where the similarities kind of stop. Why? Well, if we go back to Unreal, What you're going to notice is that if I click on this material here that we just created, on the left side I have the details, which if it was like 2ds Max, we would be able to change the color, we would be able to change all the details. But if we go scroll down here, we're going to see that we don't actually have those options. We have a lot of options here, but not those basic ones. So what gives? How can we change the material so it has the information that we wanted to have? Well, this is where it gets interesting. On the right side, you have this palette. In here, you have a lot of different nodes that you can use for creating your material. You have atmosphere, blends, color, constants, coordinates, and a lot of these options. Now, if you click anywhere in the master material, with a right click in a empty space, you get this search button. So you basically, whatever you search in here, you can, everything that you see on the right side, you can get in this palette here. So in order to change the color for this, we need to have some way of inputting data. In this case, let's take a look at the most simple thing and changing the color. Now I'm going to go right back to 3ds Max, and for this I'm actually going to click on the diffuse here. Now what you're going to get by clicking here is a way to change the color, and here it's pretty simple. If you click anywhere in this color picker, you basically get a hue selector. If you go over here, you get a whiteness selector, and then you have the RGB colors, and you have a value to choose. So it's pretty easy to choose the color. So when we are back in Unreal, we have the same ability, but it's a bit different as to how this thing is being taken into account. For example, the easiest way to change a color in Max here would be to go from white to black by simply dragging on the whiteness selector. So this is basically from black to white, or 0 to 1, by just sliding this selector. To get this option in Unreal, what we would have to do is go in and add a constant. Or from this side, if we go over here, we have a constant and a number 1 on the side. This means if I hold down 1 on my keyboard and click anywhere, I'm going to create that constant 1. So what happens here is I get this little box and a little place here, or a little circle that I can click and drag out connector. Now this connector, I can connect it to any of the nodes. For example, if I want to control the base color, I just click and drag it to the base color. And right away, what you're going to see is that I have this connection now. So just like in Max, where we had the ability to basically click and drag from 0 to 1, this is exactly the same thing, but you're basically not, you don't have the slider here, but instead, if I have this at 0, you can see the value over here. If I change this to 1, then basically the color here is now equivalent as to what you would have in 3ds Max, or basically taking the slider from 0 to 1. If I want to have a middle gray out, I would go 0.5, and now I have a gray color. Now, how does this thing look? Well, before we do anything else, I'm going to take my material. So for the time being, I'm going to put it to the side, and we need to actually apply this material to our asset. The way to do this is quite easy. All you have to do is select your asset. On the side where it says materials, you basically can select the material that you want to apply, and then go over here and click this little arrow, and that is going to apply any material that you have selected. Or you can simply click and drag that material over on the asset. As soon as we just did that, you're going to notice that this material just got black. The reason why it's black is, even though that in our material options that we have here, I'm going to make this smaller so you can see it. Even though we have the option in here that we want it to be gray, this material hasn't updated. The reason for this is that we have to save it, because as it is, it's still not a material, it's still a piece of code. And as with any piece of code, you would have to compile it in order to see the end result. So in order to compile, we need to simply hit save. By saving this, it's going to take a few seconds, and then it's going to propagate or update the look over here. So if I go and change the color again to 0.75, I would have to hit save again, wait for a few seconds, and then get the updated look on this material. So as we saw, the easiest way to create that is by using a constant node. But this is not really practical, because the only thing that we can do is go from 0 to 1 or white to black. And when it comes down to base color, we really want to have an easy way of creating this or selecting the color that we want. So for this, I'm going to select my node and delete. Now from here, I'm going to go down to constant 3 vector. So I'm going to select this and drag it out, or I can just hold down the 3 button and click anywhere. So this is the constant 3 vector. This again has only one output, so I can click and drag it out, as so, and get this look. Now, if I take a look at the constant 3 vector options, I basically have an R, G, and B values, and I have this constant. The thing is, if I click here, it's basically giving me this same color picker that we had in 3ds Max. So if we basically just go ahead and compare them, we're gonna get the similar kind of look. So we can just click anywhere that we want, select it from anything that we want. There we go. Let's try with let's go with a red color and click OK. As soon as we click that OK and we hit save, if we take a look here, we're gonna see that, well, we have a red material on the background. Now, this is all for the base color. Now, the other options in here that you can change are metallic, specular, roughness. You see we have emissive, normals, and a lot of other options in here that are grayed out for the time being, so we won't be touching on those now. But the main difference between using 3ds Max to make your materials and using Unreal is that the way that Unreal deals with materials is it's by using a PBR workflow. This means that we have a physically based rendering workflow which takes into account a base color or a diffuse or an albedo map, whatever software you might be using. It uses a roughness, metallic output to get the bulk of the information for the given material. Now, when you're creating a map for, or you're creating any of your materials, and you have to create a metallic value for it, usually what happens is that most of the time, a metallic is basically a yes/no question. You can create a material that is going to have a set amount of metallic values to it, but usually most of the time it comes down to a yes/no question. So what does this mean? Well, it's very simple. Is the material that you're creating a metal or not? So by using that, we have a 0 or 1 value. So what we can do here is use a constant, just like we did previously. So hold down 1, or just come over here and drag it out. Click 1. Or actually, I'm going to right click and click and type in constant. And here I have the options here. So you can see it can be done this way as well. So here I'm going to click and drag it to metallic. And as it's 0, this means this is not a metal. So this thing hasn't really changed. If I go in here and put a value of 1, now it's going to treat this as a metal. So if I save this again, in order to be able to see how it looks like in the scene, we get something like this. So a very, very fast way of creating a red metal. There we go. And the roughness can be controlled again with either constant, or we can use texture. So for now, I'm gonna come over here to the constant, and I want to use another one. So I'm gonna select it, Control C, Control V, and that is going to create one more constant. So that's a nice way of copying your nodes. So plug it into the roughness, and now I'm going to control this to 0.5 as such, and there we have a smoky metallic red material as so. I'm going to hit save one more time. There we go, and we have this. So now that we have a way to control the color, and we have a way to control the metallic and roughness values of our said material, what happens that if we want to have a material that doesn't have a simple color to it, but instead it has a texture to it? That is when we don't have the ability, if we use a constant 3 vector here. If we want to use a texture to it, the first thing that we would have to do is we would have to import the texture to the project that we are working on at the moment. Now, I don't want to import any outside textures, so instead for this, I'm going to use some of the already existing textures. So I'm going to go down to the starter content. In here we have a folder called textures. And in here we have a lot of different textures. So just to make everything simpler, I'm going to take a look at the first 3 here. So we have T underscore, again you see the same naming convention, T for textures, M for materials, etc. So for this, on the end of each of these textures, you're going to see an underscore D, an underscore M, and an underscore N. Then we have again a new textures with a D, M, N. So what do these letters represent? Well, if we take a look at here, we see the D, this is the diffuse color. The M is basically a mix. This tells us that there are multiple textures inside this texture. And even though this might sound a bit confusing at the moment, I will explain what it does in a second. And the last one is an N, which is the normal. So what we're going to do here, if we want to take these textures and put them in our material here so we can change them. The way to do this is, for example, the easiest way is select the texture that you want to use, go over to your material, right click and go texture, and from here choose texture sample. As soon as you click this thing, this is going to appear. Now this texture sample is basically a node in which you can plug in an existing texture. And if you go over to the side and in here just type in texture, what you're going to notice here is that next to the texture sample there is a T on the side. This means this is a commonly used node, so it has its own letter that you can choose or click and get the texture node to appear. So I'm going to delete this, hold down T, click, and we're going to have this thing selected. Now the thing is, if you have this brick beveled texture selected, you come in here, press T and create it. It should link it, but for some reason it doesn't want to do it for me. So What I'm going to do here is I'm going to go over to the side where I have the options for this texture sample. And over here we have this material expression texture base. On the side it says textures and a none next to it. The way to add an actual texture to this is by clicking this little arrow, and whatever texture you might have selected is going to put it in here. In this case it's putting the mixed clay. So for this, I actually want to use, for this one I'm going to use the D, which is going to be the diffuse color. Now, there is a different thing that you might notice with the texture sample, unlike with the constant 3 vector. Instead of having just one node that we can pull out, we actually have this white node, which I can take out and plug into, let's say, for example, the base color. But also, I can drag out individual R, G, and B channels, or I can take information from the red, the green, and the blue channels. And the last one is the alpha channel. So basically with this texture sample, I can break this down into individual channels. So for now, I'm going to select these guys, pull them back, and now I want to add in the 2 extra textures that come with this clay texture. Now instead of going and putting them individually with the texture sample, I want to go ahead, select both of them, and drag them in here like so. Make it so. And there we go. Now I want to unplug these guys from metallic and roughness. The easiest way to do it would be hold down Control and click on the connectors. That is going to unplug them from the actual master material node that we have here. So since this thing is the M, or it's the mixed texture, what we can do here is, like we just said, we can use the individual channels to put in different data. In this case, the R channel is for ambient occlusion. So if I click and drag down, this thing will plug in here. The green channel is our roughness, and the blue one is our metallic. So if I take a look on the side, you're gonna notice that I have this material now. If I click on save and check the information in my scene, you're gonna notice that now I have this look on my material. It looks nicer. And the last thing that I want to plug in here is go over to my normal, take the all the information and plug it into the normal. So click on save, and again you're going to notice as soon as this thing propagates and updates, there we have all of that information written in our material. So far we went over how to create our basic material, went over how to create or how to control the color, how to import or put in the basic vectors or the constant vectors. We also saw how we can use a texture in our material. We also saw that some of these textures can have multiple channels inside one particular texture and how to use them to get the information. So for now, I would like to cut it short here. In the next video, we're going to continue with a bit more information as to how we can make all of these changes easier for us. And instead of having to go through all of these options and always drag out lines, how we can instance certain materials and make this thing a lot more easy and user-friendlier, similar to what you would have in 3ds Max. So far, I hope you guys had fun and you managed to learn something new. If you do have any questions, leave them below. I will meet you in the comment section of the video. And as always, if you enjoyed the video, please click the like button. And if you're not subscribed, now is a great time to do so. As always, thank you very much for watching, and I will see you all in the next video. Bye-bye.